stuff. So yeah. So we're going to, yeah, we're going to in a little bit. What baby? Police Academy 3, 4. The Lego movie, this, and that.
Computers are supposed to make life.
They do to a point. How many Police Academy videos do they make? 5.
Hearing a lot about the Department of Education, confused about what it actually did.
I don't care. Oh, this one again. I'll watch this one again. I watched this one too many times. I hate that. The time capsule episode. I hate that one. I feel better.
March 11th, 2011, 2:46 p.m. The surface of the Earth shifts as the Pacific Plate slides under the North American Plate at a subduction zone 81 miles or approximately 130 kilometers east of Sendai, Japan. This region of the planet is part of the Ring of Fire, a hotbed for geologic activities such as earthquakes and volcanoes. This particular earthquake will lead to a tsunami, with waves as high as 130 feet or 40 meters, and one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The massive wave travels at speeds of up to 500 miles or 800 kilometers per hour.
Thank you guys.
Within 30 minutes, the initial wave slams into the coast. 1,242 miles or around 2,000 kilometers of the Japanese shoreline is obliterated in a matter of minutes. The magnitude of the earthquake is initially measured at 8.9 on the Richter scale, but will later be revised to 9.0. It's the fifth largest earthquake to occur since scientists started recording the magnitude of the natural phenomena over a century ago. March 11th, 2011, 3:27 p.m. The tsunami wave has penetrated miles across the Japanese island. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is flooded by seawater. Entire towns and villages are wiped out as the onslaught of water begins rushing back into the ocean. The proximity of the earthquake's epicenter to the eastern coast of Japan means that there was very little time for residents to seek shelter or brace for the impact. The tsunami and the resulting flooding causes serious damage to the nuclear power plant owned by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. The 6 nuclear reactors at the facility have been generating energy since 1979. At the time the tsunami hit, 3 of the reactors were already shut down for routine inspection. However, the reactors that still remain operational are under immediate threat of melting down due to the devastation caused by the tsunami. The reactors are designed to shut down automatically in the event of an earthquake, while backup diesel generators continuously pump water into the system to keep the fuel rods cool. Unfortunately, these diesel generators are severely damaged by the power of the tsunami and the ensuing flood. The generators fail. Without fresh water being pumped into the reactors, they begin to heat up. It's only a matter of time before Fukushima goes critical, only adding more chaos to the mayhem caused by the tsunami. The engineers at the facility know that they need to get the generators back online fast, otherwise the power plant and the surrounding area could be doused with radiation. March 11, 8:15 p.m. The Japanese government is reeling. Search and rescue efforts are launched all along the eastern coast of the islands. Thousands of people are dead. Thousands more are missing. The extent of the damage caused by the tsunami is not yet clear, and the death toll is only going to rise. But as the government scrambles to save its citizens, they are faced with a new problem. Officials have recently been informed of the problems arising at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. They released a statement declaring a separate state of emergency in the Fukushima prefecture. This will be the first warning to the general public that the second deadly crisis is now arising. 45 minutes after the announcement, an evacuation order is issued for anyone living within 2 miles or approximately 3 kilometers of the power plant. As the people around Fukushima try to recover from the devastation of the tsunami, authorities are now telling them that all their pain and loss might be compounded by a nuclear meltdown. Many began packing their most prized possessions and make plans to leave the area. However, thousands of people don't have this option. They'll need to be placed in emergency shelters or decide to ride out the nuclear storm in their own houses. March 12, 2:06 a.m. One invites go to the control room at the Fukushima power plant. Radiation levels in reactor number 1 are rising. It's clear that the lack of fresh water being pumped through the system is becoming a serious problem. Engineers have also identified a small radiation leak in one of the reactors caused by the tsunami. The power plant is severely understaffed due to everything that's going on. It's not clear what the extent of the damage is yet, or if the workers on hand will be able to contain any further leaks and prevent a meltdown. March 12, 6:46 a.m. The pressure in reactors 1 and 2 begins to rise. The fuel rods are becoming so hot that the water in the coolant tanks is beginning to boil. Steam fills the chamber as more and more water evaporates from the intense heat. The Tokyo Electric Power Company confirms that radioactive substances are leaking from the power plant. A reading conducted by Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency discovers that radiation near the facility's main gate is more than 8 times normal levels. They detect high amounts of cesium-137 and iodine-131 in the area. Officials at TEPCO ordered workers to begin pumping seawater into reactor number 1 to keep it from going critical. The salt in the water begins to corrode the piping and the pumps in the reactor. This could have disastrous consequences down the road. At the same time that salt water is being injected into reactor 1, reactor number 2's water levels begin to drop. Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Agency, which is keeping a close eye on the situation, concludes that the radioactive cesium escaping from the nuclear power plant is likely being caused by the melting of fuel rods. March 12, 6:22 p.m. A buildup of hydrogen has begun growing in reactor number 3. As the temperatures rise, huge amounts of water are evaporating from the cooling tanks. Suddenly, the excess hydrogen in the chamber ignites, and the roof is blown off the top of the containment structure, injuring 2 plant workers and 2 subcontractors who were trying to get the reactors under control. The explosion itself does not damage the reactors, which is extremely good news for anyone still in the area or working at the plant. The containment structure, however, is not so lucky, as the blast causes a partial collapse. If the engineers and workers at Fukushima Daiichi don't work fast, the catastrophic failure is imminent. 2 hours after the explosion, residents within 12 miles or 20 kilometers of the power plant are ordered to evacuate. Around 200,000 residents flee for their lives. As authorities try to persuade everyone to seek refuge outside the evacuation zone, they also proclaim that no radioactive gases have escaped from the reactors yet. This seems to be true, as radiation levels around the power plant have begun to fall. Workers continue to flood the containment structure around the overheating reactors with salt water to keep the temperatures down. A large shipment of iodine tablets is transported to Fukushima and the surrounding area to be distributed to residents who live the closest to the nuclear power plant. This is done to help prevent radiation poisoning in the early stages of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. March 13th, 3:20 a.m. A group of 90 people who have been evacuated from their homes near the power plant are put through a series of tests. The goal is to see if anyone has been exposed to high levels of radiation and to get a better idea of how bad the situation is. 3 people in the group test positive for radiation exposure. There's clearly a radiation leak at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yukio Endo warns TEPCO and the agencies involved in the containment process that there is a very real possibility that reactor number 3 may incur another explosion. March 14, 11 a.m. Workers run for their lives. Hydrogen levels in reactor number 3 are increasing. The pressure is growing, and it's only a matter of seconds before there is another blast. The hydrogen combusts. The cooling system at reactor number 2 suffers a massive amount of damage. 11 people, including employees, Subcontractors and 4 civilian defense workers are injured during the explosion. They are carried out of the wreckage, decontaminated, and loaded into emergency vehicles that bring them to a nearby medical facility. One of the walls of the containment structure collapses. Now the structure is missing a side and its roof. However, officials still maintain that the reactors themselves are contained, which should help reduce the amount of radiation escaping from the power plant. To increase the effectiveness of the cooling process, emergency crews mix boron with ocean water. Boron is highly effective at absorbing neutrons, which as a result slows the nuclear chain reactions happening in the core. Even though authorities still claim that the radiation is contained at Fukushima, they recommend anyone who did not leave during the first evacuation should remain indoors until further notice. As a result of the explosion and the cooling pumps being left unattended, approximately 8.9 feet or 2.7 meters of the control rods in reactor number 2 are above water. Radioactive steam begins to build up in the structure. March 15th, 6 a.m. There's a detonation in reactor number 2. The intense heat from the exposed fuel rods caused the hydrogen in the containment structure to detonate. This damages the suppression pool, which leads to more control rods being exposed. As a result of the third explosion in 4 days at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, the U.S. Navy decides to reposition its ships and planes in the area. They've already begun to detect low levels of airborne radioactivity, and it seems like the situation is only going to get worse. 3 sailors aboard the USS Ronald Reagan test positive for low levels of radiation in their systems. Later that morning, Secretary Yukio Edano announces that a nuclear meltdown could happen in the 3 damaged reactors at the power plant. It is confirmed that the amount of radiation around the facility has reached levels that can impact human health. Authorities recommend that anyone who lives within 18.6 miles or 30 kilometers of the power plant should remain indoors at all times to minimize the risk of exposure. A general evacuation order is given at the power plant for all workers. Around 800 people leave the area and seek shelter away from the facility in case the worst-case scenario occurs. 50 skilled workers remain behind to conduct emergency operations in an attempt to keep the reactors from melting down. They will likely receive high doses of radiation by staying, but they bravely accept this responsibility in the hopes of mitigating a disaster that could end up being on the same scale as Chernobyl. March 15th, 8:54 a.m. A fire breaks out in reactor number 4. This particular reactor had already been shut down before the earthquake occurred. However, it's believed that the fuel storage pool in the structure has caught fire and is releasing radioactive steam into the atmosphere. Prime Minister Naoto Kan explains the situation to the Japanese people and urges them to remain calm. He notes that there's a very high risk of radioactive materials leaking out of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant at this time. The government enacts a no-fly zone within 30 kilometers of the nuclear plant. 2 hours later, the fire in reactor number 4 is put out. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been collecting data around the power plant and reveals that radiation levels are 167 times the average annual dose that is acceptable for someone to receive. Further investigation determines that the exposure rate near the facility is up to 400 millisieverts per hour, when a person's exposure should only be around 2.4 millisieverts per year. It's concluded that the situation at Fukushima is becoming dire. The explosion in reactor number 2 may have compromised the integrity of the main containment vessel. Something must be done to
Yeah, I'll do B-stars in a
high
little bit.
levels of
Later on
radiation
today, I'm going to do B-stars.
escaping the reactor. That night, TEPCO plans to use helicopters to drop water into the compromised containment structure to aid in the cooling process. March 16th, 7 a.m. Another fire breaks out in the building that houses reactor number 4. It's determined that around 70% of the fuel rods in Unit 1 and 33% of the fuel rods in Unit 2 have been damaged.
Bond Smart IPL. Enjoy 2 years free from hair and hair removal.